Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first panelist, Ben Thomas, also known as Sisyphus55. But first, before I introduce our speaker, there's a bit of housekeeping that I must do. First of all, the session will be recorded and made available to everybody. Secondly, everybody is muted here. So please utilize the comments section if you want to ask any questions. And those questions will be answered in the Q&A session at the end following Sisyphus's presentation. If you're having an audio or video issue, please try logging out and logging back into the conference platform. If that fails, please attempt to restart your machine. Ben Thomas, also known as Sisyphus55, is currently a YouTuber and a researcher at McGill University. Armed with an animation style that I like to describe as a stop animation surrealist stickman, his video covers themes of love, psychology, discrimination, the path to eudaimonia or flourishing, and meaning. From Bruce Lee to somebody who philosophized whilst living in a barrel, Ben is not afraid to base his content around non-canonical thinkers or unorthodox thinkers. This certainly is not your average philosophy 101 guy. Today, he's here to talk about the process behind content creation, with creativity being an integral part of our problem solving in day-to-day life. A somewhat systematic approach may help spur your hearts and mind. He will speak on how to create meaningful content, meaningful in its creation to you, and meaningful for those who consume the content. Please welcome, without further ado, Ben Thomas, Sisyphus55.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for everyone that's attending this little presentation I put together. Today, as Bobby said, I'm going to answer a question: how can you create meaningfully? How do you make something that makes you and those who experience it feel more alive, to feel connected with yourself, with others, and the world, to feel wiser? And by meaningful, I mean true in a deeply existential and personal sense. It both offers and is based upon insight and wisdom and leads to some sort of resonant sublimity. Now, I'm not going to discuss how to become YouTube famous or make money. I think that there's enough content out there to answer those questions. And I think that creating with those sorts of goals in mind can actually lower the overall meaningfulness of the work. I think that creating meaningful art and content increases the chances that success will happen as a byproduct. But I think that such success shouldn't be given much thought. I don't think there's a better feeling than making something meaningful. And I hope I'm able to describe from my own experience and some philosophy and psychology how you can also create something meaningful. So to give a little bit of background, when I started my channel, I was following an impulse that was quite natural to me, and I would assume many others that are listening. When I was a kid, I really enjoyed making films. I really liked reading. I was very much drawn to animation. There's, you can see Batfink, you can see Swoozie, Ray Harryhausen, Don Hertzfeldt, which obviously very much influences my style. I was also very drawn to a lot of different ideas. So because of reading, I was quite into different philosophers: Albert Camus, Marcus Aurelius, just a few examples. And I made a lot of films and cartoons, and I read about filmmaking, read about philosophy. Film kind of provided a way to express all of these interests in one place. And it was this process of creation that was very fulfilling, or in better terms, meaningful. There was something thrilling about seeing something, integrating it into your own thoughts, coming up with something that is both original and somewhat inspired, because you're bringing yourself to it also, and making it an actuality and sharing it with others. It feels very magical, I think. And so this is why I tend to align with and constantly bring up the existential anthropologist Ernest Becker and the existentialist Albert Camus in their acknowledgement of the artist as the most lucid and honest existential conditions one can fulfill. Both of them kind of say that we are cast into this world against our will. We have no apparent reason to be here. We scramble to build systems and values that justify us, but these tend to fall apart in the face of absurd of the absurd, as Camus calls it. So the fact it will die, the fact, or at the very least, the appearance that none of it matters. So it's quite a dark proposition to make, and you don't necessarily have to follow along. But I think it's interesting that both of them come to the conclusion that we require some sort of compelling placeholder to justify still existing despite these kind of miserable conditions. Becker writes that we require a compelling illusion that does not lie about the human condition, that does not lie about death and reality. And he writes this here, that we need to remain lucid to live honestly. To do so, as Becker suggests in the closing lines of The Denial of Death, is to engage in a creative solution. So he says that the most any one of us can seem to do is to fashion something, an object or ourselves, and drop it into the confusion, make an offering of it, so to speak, to the life force. You can see that here. It's a quote that I really, really like. I think this very much speaks to the significance of making anything. But I would go on to argue, and they do too, that this isn't an easy solution. This isn't something that many people feel they're capable of doing. To create is to go your own way, to make something honestly new. As Becker explains, existence becomes a problem that needs an ideal answer. But when you no longer accept the collective solution to the problems of existence, then you must fashion your own. It is, in other words, a deeply personal answer to so many of the problems in life. And at the same time, the artist engages in creation fully knowing that they will come up short. So even successfully doing it, you know that you are nonetheless engaging in something that will not answer these deep-seated issues in the human condition. It can't answer that. It may, for a brief moment, provide clarity or a sense of connection or some catharsis, but it is ideally, art is honest in its inability to solve everything. And so the creative solution is much more humble than other worldviews or ideologies that attempt to give us meaning. I would say humility is necessary when you are creating. But I would also say that I don't think that this is necessarily the problem nowadays when it comes to creating content, creating art. I don't think it's a lack of humility. I think that actually most of the content we see online isn't made by megalomaniacal artists who think that they are solving the world's problems. Rather, I think that much of it is created cynically. People don't actually care at all about the impact of what they're making. They want your attention for a moment. And I think it's important to ask if this is really meaningful creation. I don't think so. I think that the impact of art, and to use a less charitable term, creative content, has greatly depleted in the constant ocean of blogs, videos, and images. We make vlogs to be consumed within the day. We await releases for albums that we will stop listening to after a week. While on the toilet, we scroll over images on Instagram that may have taken years of mastery to produce, and we forget their aura in a matter of seconds. And I'm using aura here in reference to Walter Benjamin's essay, The World of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. He argued that reproductions of art lack the one crucial element of aura, of the art piece's presence in time and space. This is going to be a bit of a simplification of Benjamin's aura, but I think it's useful when discussing creative content online these days. I don't think that much of what we make anymore has this idea of aura being considered. It is generally, when we're making things, we kind of conceive videos, TikToks, images as easily disposable and easily reproducible. And actually the ease of reproduction makes it more effective. Liking and sharing means constant proliferation of it. Difficult word. And Benjamin would think that this is disgusting, that we experience a sort of distance when we see an original art piece or an artifact in a gallery or something that means a lot to us. And in this distance, there's the aura, and it provides a kind of moment of contemplation because there's a separation from what is being observed and the observer. Whereas when we watch a TikTok video, YouTube video, these pieces of content tend to try their best to actually bridge the gap, to minimize the distance between the observer and the observed. They try to be as relevant as possible, and we see this especially with algorithms. They try to be easily reproducible. And I think that the effect of getting rid of this auratic distance is that they feel a little bit neutered. Whereas the aura allows for contemplation, providing space for us to integrate the art into our own experience, our own condition. This new auraless form of content only permits distraction. Our thoughts are replaced by the thoughts of others, opinions, noises, images. Instead of bringing us closer to the absurd, allowing for that lucidity and existential contemplation that both Becker and Camus praise, we are in a constant state of escape. Creative content is now created to distract, to hook us in momentarily and then spit us back out as soon as it has exploited us, whether through extracting private information for companies or exposing us to ads. Some of my videos are, I think, cheeky examples of this, in terms of I will sometimes use clickbait titles to draw people into a little bit more contemplative, boring philosophical discussions. And then I would also argue that I'm being hypocritical. I have engaged in this sort of neutered form of creation many times with videos. I've made content thinking about how easily it could be shared, how easily it could be communicated to other people, and not really considering the sort of meaning behind it. And I would overall say that this is not the form of art that I really want to discuss today. And I think on the topic of finding meaning through meaningful creation, it is a form of creation that should be ideally avoided, and at the very least strategically produced. And by the latter, I mean in terms of something that I've heard about Steven Spielberg. I heard that he releases big blockbusters that he might not personally enjoy, but it's so he can then secure the funding for passion projects. I think this method is pretty realistic, especially if you gain a certain level of status. It's something that I do. Sometimes I'll make a few videos that I don't really have a huge personal attachment to, in order to, in the future make something that I do really care about, but has a bit more creative risk. And generally the creative risk kind of pays off, but it does require some resources. Yes, it would be better for there to be a world where all art is honest and provides this sort of aura and it's meaningful, but that's a very radical discussion that I think will kind of stray from the topic at hand. So let's return to that meaningful, good creative art that Becker and Camus love so much. Let's try to make something that adds lucidity to our lives. As I've said, we cast an object we have fashioned into the confusion as an offering, a natural extension of our own irrational presence in this world in the hope of catharsis or meaning or solving the problem of existence. And this is nonetheless a cynical act. As stated, the job of art isn't to bring world peace or solve systemic issues. It might do this as a byproduct. But in my opinion, the primary purpose of creation is an offering to all that we love and hate about being here. And on this point, I'm reminded here of the heavily paraphrased Buddhist vow, although Buddhism is unattainable, we vow to attain it. And here is where I would like to more closely look at the creative process. How do you engage in actively pursuing a solution that you know will not solve anything? Most would give up. It's a Sisyphean task. This is why many see creation and the arts as a purposeless pursuit. What are you really contributing to the world? How could you possibly make money off of this? I wouldn't really listen to such views. Of course, I come from a biased position. But I do think when you are truly engaged in meaningful creation, these opinions become very difficult to hear. My videos, the more soulful ones, the more kind of personally meaningful ones, are made with the idea that they will solve some aspect of the human condition, and yet I work on them all the while knowing that it will not. How do I remain encouraged? I focus purely on the process. And to return to Zen Buddhism here, this is very similar to Suzuki's own instructions on practicing Zen Buddhism. The practitioner who seeks to find salvation or enlightenment in their practice will surely fail. They create a dualism, a here and a there, a present and a future state. Those who want to create art or some form of online content may likewise create with the idea that one day they will be ready or they will make it. This dualistic thinking is limiting to the practice and the process. You're going to feel frustrated, and you're always going to be comparing yourself to the future state. Suzuki uses the image of the fog when discussing this process. In a fog, you do not know you are getting wet, but as you keep walking, you get wet little by little. He recommends instead that you should simply be sincere in each moment and make your full effort in the present. And this sounds a little bit woo-woo and abstract, and I would like to entertain an example I have, and that's my first video I made. And it was very poorly made, very awful quality. You can see there's a spelling mistake. The thumbnail, you can't actually read the text. And then there's just a lot of, I don't know if it was just because it was made in 2015, but just some sort of cringe level like examples, like using YOLO and started from the bottom Drake memes and stuff. It's something that I, looking back, it's like I don't feel like great about on like a sort of expertise level. But I remembered that when I made it when I was 17, I was only focused on creating it. I was just focused on the process. I had no idea that it would lead to where I am now. I tossed it out into the world after really focusing on the process, and it happened to do well. That's it. And it also felt quite meaningful to make. And I think that's really like the main focus of it was I was fully committed to just making it. I just felt like I needed to. It didn't, there was no idea about like money or getting subscribers or anything. I would argue here I had what Suzuki would call a beginner's mind. He says that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. The less you know, the more potential paths you have when you create something. So I highly recommend, if you're in the business of creating meaningful work, that you focus primarily on the process. Cherish it, protect it. Don't use your art as a means to an end. So now we're getting a lot closer to understanding the process of creating meaning and meaningful creation. But what sort of process entails meaning? I've used this word a lot. What does it mean? And here I'd like to indulge in some cognitive psychology, especially with Professor John Vervaeke's meta-theory of cognitive knowledge. So he's a U of T professor. Firstly, Vervaeke tends to assign meaning as that feeling when we feel intensely aware of our relationship with the world. So meaningful creation would lead us to feel something sublime, like we are making something that is a part of something larger than ourselves. Now, it takes some competence to make something, whether it's a book or a video, whatever. You need to have some knowledge. However, just because somebody knows how to paint a picture does not mean that they will create something meaningful. Likewise, if somebody wants to convey a certain idea, their own personal truth, but they aren't very good at writing, then they're also going to struggle in creating something meaningful. So this is where Vervaeke's theory of cognition is quite useful. He identifies 4 types of knowledge: procedural, perspectival, participatory, and propositional. 4 Ps. So to start with propositional knowledge. So when I made my video for her, which is it's about a breakup I went through, I had certain ideas that felt personally true. This would be considered propositional knowledge, knowing that something is true. This might be in an empirical sense or in a more personal sense. I wanted to speak my truth. I had certain propositions that I wanted to convey. However, this isn't enough. There are so many truths in a situation as complicated as a breakup. I needed to know the key aspects of the situation. I needed to know what was relevant. And to do this, I engage in the second form of cognitive knowledge, perspectival knowledge, knowing my place in the world and others' places in the world. I had to sort through my feelings and determine a way in which to present my truth appropriately, especially with the perspectives of others in mind. We can think of perspectival knowledge as keeping the audience in mind. So it's really being aware of your own biases, your own BS, and also other people's. And then when making the video, I needed to know, obviously, how to make it. And while this process is also guided by perspectival and propositional knowledge, it largely relies on procedural knowledge of the process. For me, this is knowledge of editing, animation, writing, and so forth. And we live in a golden era of finding ways to gain procedural knowledge. And finally, throughout the whole process, I rely on participatory knowledge. I am an agent in an arena, and sometimes many arenas. In this example, I am in the arena of my personal relationships, the arena of YouTube, the arena of philosophy. I am in an arena with many other agents, and the act of sharing art heavily relies on this sort of participation. I need to know how to engage in the fields that I'm operating within, and the identity of the other people in these fields. And you can see all these forms of knowledge are very much tied together. They're, very close, but it's also very significant if you're missing one or the other. But finally, how could one practice and strengthen these forms of knowledge? Obviously, engaging in all of these forms of knowledge helps in making, the video, like for her, very both personally meaningful and just as importantly, I think collectively meaningful, judging by its reception. Like I didn't expect so many people to, especially in the comments and through emails, use it as a kind of jumping point to gain sort of insights into their own personal relationships and to even open up discussions with their partners. I think it was very, I'd like to think of it as a healthy addition to the dialogue on romance, at least in online spaces. And I made it to remind everyone in mind of trying to cast light or solve a certain issue in human condition in general, starting with myself, knowing full well that I wasn't going to. That it is a bit of that humility is still needed. I'm only myself. I can't offer an ideology that will solve people's relationship problems. But how could we actually practice these forms of knowledge? And for me, and I think for Vicky argues somewhat the same, you need to honestly engage with the world around you. In doing so, you gain wisdom. Wisdom, as Vervaeke defines it, is to know and love what matters deeply. So engaging in the world around you, you develop a more differentiated self through knowing what is relevant. Through this, I believe you develop a greater cognitive complexity and you're able to enhance your ability to create meaningful art. For me, this is through seeking flow experiences. This is something that I also bring up in a lot of my videos. Flow is that state where you are fully engaged, where you lose yourself in some sort of activity. Sports, good conversation, cooking, watching a movie, traveling. Specifically, you're engaging in an activity where the challenge is slightly above your skill set. This means you are exposing yourself to some level of discomfort or risk. And in doing so, you're kind of opening yourself up to the world. You're kind of being vulnerable. You're letting the world in a little bit. And then you're also engaging with the world. You're giving the world a bit of yourself. And this is, at least Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's the kind of the foremost researcher he was of this flow experience, he suggests that this is pretty much one of the greatest feelings you can have in life. And when I've done this, a lot of these experiences preceded beginning this channel and this channel doing quite well. I was, working 50 hours a week at a liquor store in the dead of winter. I was traveling to the Galapagos. I was volunteering with giant tortoises. I was learning guitar. I was reading incredibly challenging works of philosophy and psychology, fiction, nonfiction. Um, I, uh, I came out of these experiences of flow with some greater knowledge, some greater self knowledge, some greater knowledge about the world. And it was whether it was knowledge on perspective, on some skill, the world and others or myself. It was those four cognitive knowledges that are necessary for creating meaningful work. And this leads to greater knowledge or wisdom, which allows for more meaningful creation. To make meaningful art is to live fully and embrace life in all its ups and downs, to fully plunge in and engage. The beautiful thing is that when you create and share your creations, you potentially enhance the world for others, and they too may feel inspired to embrace the world. Maybe this is even through art. It's a potentially great system to be a part of. It's where there's something larger than you that also engages your most unique and distinct qualities. This is something that Becker also brings up, is one of the kind of ontological paradoxes, or the main ontological paradox of human existence, is we simultaneously want to be part of something greater than ourselves, and then to also be very unique and special. And, he says religion for a long time kind of offered that, because God loves you specifically for who you were. And then also he also made you a part of something larger. And then in the age of secularism, he said kind of romance led to kind of replaced this. So we kind of saw that in our romantic partner. Our partner loves us for who we are, and also is helping us engage in a larger thing than ourselves, which is the relationship. But Becker kind of suggests that a more eternal, timeless form of satisfying this paradox is through art. You can really join a community just by sharing this part of you with the rest of the world, and through the necessity of engaging with the rest of the world in order to create it to begin with. And what's more existentially gratifying than that? I can't think of much. But I'm gonna summarize things, because I threw a lot of words at you, and hopefully some of them made sense. But to summarize quickly, life can seem meaningless, and I think that that's a common sentiment among a lot of people my age nowadays. And I do think a lot of people also know that creating stuff is one way to deal with this. However, I don't think we should expect creating stuff to solve issues of meaninglessness. Rather, the lucidity and meaningfulness of creation paradoxically requires some humility. And we also shouldn't create things in the absence of care. It's a serious effort to engage in. You can see that especially now with both the psychological issues and the political issues that have stemmed from, certain articles and false information that can kind of be propagated online. A lot of people are making content now with specific ideological motives that I think has been very socially damaging. And I don't think, at least I wouldn't want to contribute to that. Too much online content nowadays is also just really made to be shared. It's just to grab our attention for a minute or so. I think instead you should create to create. People notice when something is made with sincerity, and you should create to engage in the process itself. And this process requires knowing a few things. You need to know what your truth is. You need to know who you and your audience is. You need to know how to convey this truth. And you need to know where your truth should be conveyed. This knowledge requires developing wisdom to know and love what matters deeply. And to do this, you need to engage sincerely with the world around you through challenging yourself and being present. And that is all I have. I hope that made some sense. And we have the if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them also.
Right. Thank you. Very, very. I think everybody would agree that that talk was in and of itself something that could be called meaningful. And I'll start off with a couple of questions about yourself before moving on to a bit about the content creation process. And for everybody in the chat and everybody viewing at home, do feel free to pose any of the questions that you have in the chat, and we'll be picking and answering some of them. So, in terms of that point that we touched on towards the end of the PowerPoint, we were talking about becoming something greater than the self and becoming involved in that community. This question is sort of twofold. So, do we feel like, especially with the irony or the acceptance that you are on a media where things are highly curated, whether that be on Instagram, on TikTok, or on YouTube, that both authentic and sincere art is your sign of love to the world, and also the greatest gift of yourself to the world, in which you are showing authenticity on a platform where there is so much curation.
So kind of what do I think of the irony of the authenticity, that it's both authentic, but it's very curated.
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic there.
I would actually recommend. I recently talked to Hans Schurgmuller, and some people might know his channel, Carefree Wandering. He's a philosophy professor, and he kind of came up with this concept of prophelicity. So he talks about Trilling's two forms of forming identity. There's sincerity, which is something that was kind of in the from medieval ages to recently, where people's identity was formed through family roles. And then there was authenticity, which is kind of 19th, 20th century romanticism. And that's more the idea that you're not really just born into who you should be, that you actually kind of become who you are. So kind of like what Nietzsche would talk about, and like you kind of unmask who you are, or you become who you are. And he actually suggests that we're now living in a new age of identity creation called prophelicity, where authenticity doesn't really matter. Like we're kind of implicitly walking around knowing that there maybe really isn't an authentic inner core or inner self. We actually form a lot of our identity through profiles that we make, through social media profiles. And I mean, almost everybody I know has a social media profile. You don't have to be like a super successful YouTuber. We have kind of reassigned how sincere, how authentic something is, not by how we feel about it, but by how many likes it gets, how much engagement it gets. And he's not entirely critical of this, because he's a proponent of Taoism, and Taoism is very much kind of with the idea that there isn't an essential self or anything. But he does see that there could be some issues. It could lead to megalomaniacal kind of narcissism with curating profiles. So that's all I can add to that. It is interesting. And he does say that sometimes social media influencers, they use authenticity to promote their profile. So it's all a very kind of cynical thing. Maybe a bit of a sad comment, but yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of just that authenticity online, how much do you feel you are limited by the profile or the profiles that you do create? Because I think many creators, especially within, let's say, the gaming sphere or the streaming sphere, they feel unable to move on due to concerns about monetization or loss of viewership and core viewer base. From, for example, if they start in game A, they might be bored of game A or have outgrown that audience and want to move on to game B. However, that shift may be costly towards their, well, let's just say their business. So how much of that profile is limiting to content creators who may be able to shift their scope or achieve greater potential, but then are drawn back by the monetary shackles that they have now already freed themselves from due to the initial success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a bit of what I was talking about with Spielberg, that sometimes you do have to, at least with the current structures of, the algorithm and everything, you have to kind of one or two projects that maybe you're not super crazy about in order to kind of fund a project that you really care about. It's a bit of a realistic approach. I do wish things could be better, and I do think that what you're bringing up is very relevant to, I think, a lot of the mental health issues that goes on with content creators, because a lot of the times they can internalize the values of their community, or they can start kind of getting lost in the values of their community and not really like considering what they want, or kind of scared to engage in what they want. But it's very much I think, at least for my own personal experience, a balance of, I'm gonna make some things that you guys like, and I'm gonna make some stuff that I like. That's yeah.
So I mean, I think, I feel like this is quite a central central question to the creation process, or rather the gratification that you may or may not gain from the creation process, from creating, or perhaps the road towards creating that, what we might look at as the perfect video, or the video that hits that right spot. And I understand that there might be a sense of, perhaps achievement is the wrong word, but fulfillment at the end of completing a video. However, do you think that sense of completion will ever fade or change in its nature, or has it done for you?
I do think so, because I think that you can. I talk about the process, and one thing that I think I could have talked about a little bit more is that it's important to kind of shake things up after a while. You can. I've talked to other content creators, and they can kind of get a sense of, they know exactly what the algorithm will do if they, kind of do the check marks of creating a video. They know exactly what video they need to make in order to like do well. And that can be a little bit, it kind of takes a little bit of the magic out of it. And I do think like it is good to just kind of switch things up, try something new every once in a while. And I mean, I'm always open to that. I'm not entirely attached to doing YouTube for the rest of my life. And when it comes to the point where I don't want to specifically make YouTube videos, then I think I'd be comfortable with doing something else. But I do think that there are certain things that I value, like, talking about mental health and philosophy, and sharing different ideas and stuff that or even like personal stories. I think that will always be important. So I think it's more about, I don't know. It's you could get kind of bored of just the same sort of outcomes and videos and stuff. So it's more important to focus on like what are the very intrinsic, essential things in that process that are gonna kind of stay with you throughout your life, that you're always gonna kind of like, and that's how you kind of have to be in touch with your values.
Yeah. We have a question from Victoria here, who asks, on your last channel update video, you said that you had videos prepared for weeks. You have talked about the process in this presentation, but I'd like to hear about your experience in that time span. Were the most important factors to make it possible while in uni? Did you struggle? In that case, how did you manage to cope?
Yes. So this was quite, I'm personally very proud of this, because this was something I thought of very far in advance. So in 2020, during like the lockdowns, I took time off of school. I just took like 2 semesters off, and I just kind of devoted myself to YouTube. And I did want to finish when I went back to university. And I knew if I wanted to keep growing the channel, I would need to make 3 videos a week, and basically release 1, stockpile 2. So I just did the math, and I calculated up until September, when school starts, because I wasn't going to make videos during the school year. And I hired somebody, my brother Housecat, and he does amazing animation and editing, to basically like each week, once I had stockpiled all of these videos, each week during the school year, I would just send him 1 video to make that week. And it wasn't that much work for him to do. And it also provided, he was able to have kind of a job he liked doing a lot more. Thank you. So it was very, it was a lot of pre-planning, like an insane amount of pre-planning. And it worked completely fine. But I do think one of the drawbacks is it kind of made the process feel a little bit like just clicking buttons, and it didn't feel as creative. Like now I can sit down, and each week I can kind of decide what I want to make. Beforehand, I had to like predict like I had to come up with 3 video ideas every week, which was a little bit could be kind of hard. Yeah.
Zane asks, psychology and philosophy seem to have always been the focus of your creative ideas. Can you go more into the journey of choosing a creative medium, i.e., animation? Why did you choose the style to demonstrate your ideas over face to camera, etc.?
Yeah, that's interesting. I when I was really young, I just really liked animation. I was very much drawn to it. I think I brought up like I loved Ray Harryhausen, loved stop motion animation. I loved like the old Pink Panther, a lot of those old cartoons, The Simpsons, Pixar, anything on Nickelodeon. And I went to like I think my parents let me go to like a little animation camp one year. We were like learning to animate on like Microsoft PowerPoint. I would have been like 12 or 13 or something. I loved it. I was and I just feel like it's such a fun visual way to convey ideas, and there's something about conveying very complex and sometimes maybe controversial or heavy issues, but in a sort of I don't know, kind of loose visual fashion that makes it a lot more appealing. I've thought about kind of going like face to camera like a little bit more often, but like for me, I feel like I don't know. Like I there's some I need to explore why I'm not as comfortable doing that. I think it's because I want people to really just focus on what I'm talking about. I don't want to create like a personality personally, but this isn't like a knock on other YouTubers that like show their face more or anything. Yeah.
Yep. We wanted to talk, at least Helen and I, a little bit about the epistemic distance between art and a man. So we talked about gallery, and inside of gallery, how you may interact with an artwork, and how social media, and especially TikTok, perhaps tries to bridge that gap. What do you feel like is the difference between traditional art and the dynamic between newer art or video forms of art throughout an everyday context where it's much more accessible or perhaps much more casual?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was bringing up with Benjamin, and I think as an extension, you can look at like the work of Theodore Adorno, and I do think that they can be a little bit too pretentious when it comes to this. They absolutely hated pop culture and any form of like easily reproducible art for the masses. I think that completely has a pivotal role, especially when it comes to social movements. But I do think Benjamin was right in that, and he wrote about this way before, like there was TikTok, but there is a necessary kind of like distance. I think you really need, at least for contemplation, because there's so many like kind of mental health problems going on right now, and I think a lot of it, and I'm guilty of this too, is that like you wake up and you immediately go on your phone if you have any bad thoughts, or like any second there's space in your day and you want to avoid those bad thoughts, you go on your phone, you just consume, and you're consuming, you're distracting, and art ideally, good art, and that might sound a little bit elitist, is really made for contemplation. It's for you to like kind of actually deal with these thoughts. And I think it's just the fact that like, literally most TikToks are made for like 12 seconds. And it's like, I don't know how much that really is helping you contemplate things. Even if you find something that's like useful, like you're not going to remember it. There's too much information. There's not enough, this is why I talk about wisdom. You don't have enough, we don't have enough like kind of practical knowledge to actually sort what's relevant to us. I hope that answers that.
Yeah. Are you good to stay for 5 more minutes, or are you?
Yeah. I can stay for 5 more. It's okay.
Right. Question from Chris. How do you think you'll be remembered? Because YouTube is still quite young in terms of legacy. Do you think digital media will become as prevalent as books within settings like universities?
That's really interesting. Because there is something revolutionary about, as I was saying before, how much information there is now. It does feel like I could just get lost in the abyss, and that's completely fine. I don't care too much legacy wise, but I do kind of wonder, like I like reading kind of, you know, biographical accounts of like Freud or like Sartre and like what they were up to as like young writers in their like college days or even when they were like quite famous. And a lot of like, you know, philosophical influencers or YouTubers or just people that are kind of dedicated to social issues and they kind of get discourse going about social issues. I do wonder if they're going to be kind of written about in the same light. Um, I, that would be cool. I think that would be pretty cool. I have no idea how the world is going to see these things, and right now it's pretty popular to talk about how bad pop psychology and pop philosophy is, and that's also a valid critique, and it might be a negative historical legacy. So I don't know, but that is a very interesting question.
Right, we've got a question from Duncan. Your visual style is the most interesting component of your style. Do you often have to think hard about how to depict certain abstract ideas, or does it usually come naturally?
I tend to use a sort of free form of. I sit down when I do storyboards before the animation, and I really just kind of whatever comes to my head, and sometimes it is kind of difficult to convey certain ideas, but I actually try to limit the time of like thinking. It's like, what is like the easiest way, like most kind of noumenal way to convey this idea? It's a little bit hard to explain. There's like a psychoanalytic technique that they use. It's not free expression, but something where they would just draw whatever's on your mind, and I almost kind of use that. And then of course, if things completely don't make sense, I like change them like later on. But so I guess I would say it usually comes naturally, but it's a very deliberate process of natural expression.
So almost surrealist.
Yes.
We have a question from Aiden. Hi, have you ever done content collaborations when you didn't have many subscribers? And do you think that it was a good way to grow a channel, at least within its early stages?
When I was a much smaller channel, there was another channel that reached out to me, and I remember I was quite excited that a part of it was like, oh wow, that's a compliment, and then also, oh my god, this could help me grow my channel. Kind of thinking in business terms, and they proceeded to be very bad with deadlines, and then they sent like a video to me telling me that they were in like monk's clothing, and they told me that they were like self-actualized, and they'd been like running through the rain, and they had like achieved nirvana. And I just said, that's awesome, but like I gotta push this video out, so I don't think we can keep doing this collaboration. So I think that scarred me a little bit for a few years. I think it's a good way to grow the channel, but I do think that you need to really think about how you want to convey, and this is going to sound a bit business, but how you want to convey your brand. Don't just say yes to anything. It could be very jarring for your audience sometimes if it's like a completely different channel. So you do have to have some knowledge of what your audience wants, first of all.
Yeah. Last question. So our last question here, unfortunately, we have to close out after this. Gallet asks, which philosophers inspire you the most?
I mean, obviously, like I do quite like Camus, just based off of the the name of the channel. I do have my own personal grievances with him also, or not personal. He's been long dead. My own intellectual grievances with him. He's not perfect. I like Mark Kingwell. He's just quite nice to read. And I do like I like Zizek. He's quite fun to read and engage in. And I'm recently, and Byung-Chul Han, both of them are quite good. They're good complementary authors. Zizek, I recently picked up a Surplus Pleasure, which it's quite a dense book, but I would recommend it. And yeah, those are the kind of main philosophers that come to mind.
All right, thank you very much. So unfortunately for everybody, I'm sure we have plenty more questions. We're going to have to close out the session there. Today, just a quick summary, Sisyphus talked on his entire creation process, or perhaps what motivates him to create and what he does want to pass on as perhaps part of his legacy in terms of finding meaning. And I'm sure everybody here has learned something to a lot from this broadcast. Our next session is a networking session, I believe, which will happen in about 9 minutes. But I'll see you then. And thank you very much for Sisyphus, who will come back tomorrow with Olivia Sun for another panel.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.